Alright, welcome to our first video, series 1 here, for installing Linux for a small Hadoop cluster in VMware. This is the Debian version, and so we're going to start by getting Linux installed and our cluster created prior to installing Hadoop, and then the second installation of this will be getting Cloudera's CDH4 Hadoop running within our new cluster. So we start out by getting the Debian small distributions. So we click on getting Debian on their list and go to find a small installation image, and I'm using a 64-bit Linux, so I chose AMD 64. Now once we've done that and that's downloaded, we start off on creating our cluster. So going to VMware, I'm going to create a new virtual machine, and I am going to do a typical installation, installing operating system later, Linux. It's 64-bit Debian version 6, but that doesn't really matter. And I am going to call this machine CDH4-1. Now I'm going to place it in the location where I like to put my VMs. There's a couple, as you'll see, and I have on my C drive actually a folder called VMs, and I've got something ready for it called the CDH4 Debian DMX cluster, and then within that I'll make CDH4-1 for my new machine, and then we'll just do a minimal root, and this is going to be best practice, let's say, for this type of thing, where we put a separate disk for HDFS. HDFS should probably be mounted with different options than the root file system, and it's nice not to blow out our root file system by inadvertently storing too much stuff on HDFS, so we'll make a second disk for that. While I'm at it, I can customize a couple things. For one thing, I'm going to give these VMs about 2 gigs, and I'm going to give them 2 cores. So they'll be just monster machines here. And then we're good there. And before I boot this machine up, I'm going to go ahead and take the opportunity to create that second hard drive as well. So we'll add a disk, regular hard disk, and make it, well, I'll make this one 80 gigabytes. So this will be an 80 gigabyte drive per node that I'll have available for HDFS. And I'm going to make 3 nodes for this cluster. So we're good to go, and let's boot that sucker up. Oh, I forgot one little thing, and that is I want to power this down now. Forgot one very crucial thing, and that is I need to give it the CD drive, which is my ISO image that I downloaded earlier from Debian. So that's in my downloads directory. It's the Debian 6 AMD 64. Now we're going to be much happier booting up. All right, let's try that again. We'll just go mostly through the standard Debian install. And from time to time, I may help time move along here so that this will be a short video. Okay, we're good for now. It's set up DHCP. We're going to change that later, as you'll see. So I'm going to say this is CDH4-1. I give things a nice little fake domain called VM, so it'll be CDH4-1.vm. Pick a password from my root user, and then I just do a shortcut. I'm going to make a user called DMX demo, because this is really for SyncSort's DM Express that we're building this cluster. You can make any kind of user. and choose a password for that user. Put it on Mountain Time for my hillbilly self. And off we go. Now, I'm just, again, because the root system, I don't really care how it's laid out. I'll take all the defaults on that one as well. And it's my 8 GB that I want as the root. And all files in one partition is fine. Write changes to disk. And there we go. And this will proceed. And through the magic of time shifting, the base system is almost all installed now. And it's going to ask us for a little bit of additional information, and we'll come back and get all the requisite software we need in addition to the basis stuff. So there's no graphical system going on this system, no X windows, and nothing that I don't need to run the cluster other than whatever small amount of cruft that Debian puts in. However, I do want to use a caching proxy so that I'm not going out to the net too much to get software packages. So I'll specify that. And we'll know soon enough whether that's working. Yep, and it looks like my caching proxy is working. This is a great thing. If you install a lot of systems, set up Squid as a general purpose proxy or something specific like apt cacher or whatever it's called, and you don't have to download the same packages over and over again. And then this will continue to install some of the stuff for the package manager. Debian pops up a little thing called popularity contests, which allows a little bit of anonymous monitoring. If you want to contribute to that, you can say yes. Otherwise, just continue with the default of no. So now the system software that it needs, or application-oriented software, the only thing I absolutely need is an SSH server. So I'll go ahead and let it install that. And other than that, just the standard utilities. And that's all we'll do. And with the cache proxy, that should be pretty darn fast. Not absolutely everything that we'll need to manage a cluster will be installed by the end of this, but most everything. And the distributions and their packaging mechanisms vary a little bit between what you'll have to install. But for Debian, I'll do Debian, and we'll probably do a video for CentOS RHEL as well, so you can see that. All right, there's our SSH server. Definitely necessary for cluster management and even for installation by Cloudera Manager. So here we go. The last thing it does is it asks Gregory Grubbs to install Grub for the bootloader. So I'll say yes, and we will then boot into our new system. It is so excitement. We don't want to time shift this and let you miss out on the excitement of the new system booting up. So here we go. It'll boot fast because there's not much on it at this point. And then all we have to do is boot in as our, well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and log in as my unprivileged user, although at this point there's not much I can do as that user. So I'll have to get super user anyway. So the first thing we need to do is actually I'll go ahead and say I'll set up the caching proxy that I used just for my own purposes. This is going to come in very handy when I have 3 nodes installing the same software packages at once. So I'll go ahead and set this up, and it's just a matter of setting up my HTTP proxy. And then let's just log out and make sure that worked. Yay. All right. So we will, let's say first thing we'll do is get this additional software that I want to use that I find necessary. And that would be, let's do an apt-get update. It's just Debian stuff. And I'm going to install a number of packages. So I want to use rsync, also very handy for managing clusters, and something I use a lot once I've got the thing up. I like nmap to see what ports are open. And then for VMware tools, I'm going to have to install the Linux headers and the compiler. So Linux headers is the package is linux-headers- whatever kernel I happen to be running, whatever version, which can be had by uname-r, and a GCC. And I think that's all I want to install. No, it's not by far. I'm referring to some crib notes here. Make, which is probably also already on there, but sudo is a big one, and cfdisk just in case that's not there. Doesn't know about cfdisk, so forget that. Okay. And we'll let all those things install. And then while I'm still sitting at root, even on a little VM machine with nothing else on it, it still makes me uncomfortable to be root, so I'm going to set up sudoers here. So all I have to do on Debian, because let me just look at, show you sudoers really quickly. There is a rule saying sudo all. So if you're in the group sudo, then you have sudo capability. So that's all I'm going to do is I'm going to add my my user to the sudo group, and that would be add the MX demo, and that's all I need to do now. I'll log out, log back in. So you can see I'm now in the sudo group. Let's try it out. And yes, so now I'll behave responsibly from this point on. And we're good there. So I'd like to install VMware tools, and we already have the prerequisites for that. So all we do is go up to the menu. It makes a device available for us, which we have to mount. Sudo mount dev cd-rom on, let's say, media. Usually there's a media or a cd-rom mount point already there. And there it is. So I'll go into temp, say, get that all unarchived and installed. And then we'll just do a couple more steps after this is installed, which involve getting our second disk drive mounted and set up, and getting the networking fixed before we do a clone of this machine. So into VMware tools I go. I say cd sudo VMware install, and then I get to hit return about 27 times because I always take all the defaults, and yet I have to put them in every single time. So I won't make you sit through all of this. I'll do a little more time shifting and we'll be back. And the VMware Tools install is magically done. So now if I look at the disks, I don't see that second disk I made, and that's because it's not set up. If I look at there should be a dev SDA. That's my root that Debian set up for me. But my second disk should be there as SDB, sure enough. So I'll go ahead and give it a partition, table, CF disk, dev SDB. And we want a new partition, primary, full 80 gigs. Write it. Yes. And we're good to go. And then all we need is a file system on that. So I'm going to make fs.ext what? Let's make an ext4. If you look on the internet right now, towards the end of 2012, Yahoo has done a lot of testing with ext3. That's probably the best tested file system for HDFS. But ext4 is slightly faster, and even though it's a journaling file system and we don't need journaling on a self-healing file system like HDFS, nonetheless, we have control over that. We can turn off the journaling features of ext4, so that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to go with that ext4 on dev SDB1, and we are done with that. Next step, the last one for the disk, is to make sure fstab knows about it. So we'll say SDB1 gets mounted on /data. Oops, that's another thing I have to do. It is an ext4 file system. We will use defaults and no A times, so don't keep track of write times here, access times. It's going to make that a little bit faster. And we will go ahead and mount this on the first round. Okay, that should be good. As soon as I make my actual mount point of /data, then this is what I do. I'll say mount-a, which means mount all of the usually mounted file systems. And when we do dfs-h, do I see it there? SDB1 on /data, yes, it's there. And we're good to go. So, the last thing we'll do before we clone this son of a gun is we need to fix our networking. So I want, what I want to do is create a fixed IP for this machine and for the other nodes in my cluster so that I always know what they are. Doesn't need DHCP, I just want fixed static addresses, and I want to make sure that their host names are correct and that they know about each other. So to get all of those things to happen, I need to look at Etsy hostname, the interfaces file, and Etsy hosts itself. So the first thing I have to do here is set this up to automatically come up as a static address. See, it's 31.217 is what I had carefully planned on. Netmask, the usual, and the gateway that my VMware at least is using right there. Okay, so there's my networking, and of course I have the right host name here, and I'm just going to fix this up. And make a couple copies of that and give them their addresses. Whoop. Get the right line, and there we go. Okay, so that should be good. And I believe that's all we need to do. And what we're going to do now is actually make the nodes of our cluster So I'll get this one halted, and then we'll clone it. And cloning is a beautiful thing because it allows us to make smaller copies of these machines. So what I'm going to do here is just say clone. And I'm going to do one crazy thing. It's going to be a linked clone. It's going to be called ch4-2. But I'm going to store it on a different disk. Since I have 2 disk drives in my laptop, I might as well make use of those 2 spindles, and I'll put this thing in somewhere else. I also have a Debian DMX cluster folder here, and this VM and its disk I'm going to put over there. And then while I'm at it, I might as well make CDH4-3 as well and get that in the right place. Yay! Okay, so that's where that goes. And we finish. Doop doop doo. Then I go back to my original, not to my clone, and clone it again. You start cloning clones and you get, you know, all sorts of genetic disarray. And we move this back. I should have copied the path. See, I try to make fast, efficient little videos, and I just, it's just tough. And my cluster with my CDH4-3 folder, and that's where that goes. So those 2 clones are both going to be on the D drive, and the other one is on the C drive. So at this point, I'm all-ready. They have their, by the way, they have their drives as well. So even the drive, you know, the disk gets cloned, that configuration gets copied. So I'm going to power everything up now. Or at least those 2 clones, and we'll take care of those. So all we'll have to do is make sure that their host name and IP addresses are correct, and we will be done with setting up Linux on a cluster. Okay, once the machine boots up, let me start with CDH4-2, and I will get into the machine. We will edit our 3 files. Of course, etc host should need no change, but we'll just take a look at it because we're paranoid. And this is CDH4-2, and it has an IP address of 218. And here's how I test that that worked. First of all, I just double check that, look there. I want to say host name, there's a host name command, is set to the value of etc host name. And I want to restart networking just to make sure the interface comes up. Let's take a look. It came up. It is .218. If I log out of the machine, it shows me that it's now CDH4-2. That's what it thinks its host name is. So I'm pretty happy. So let's do exactly the same thing over here. Well, not exactly the same thing. The exact same thing with variations. Three, that's the variation. And then down here, 219. And we are good. If I ping CDH4-1, it sees it, and -2, it sees it, and they have their correct IP addresses, and everything is good, and we're done. Next video, we'll be getting Cloudera on this little cluster. Thanks.